Good afternoon. Firstly, a very warm welcome to this webinar, the Active Travel Restart Planning for Post-Lockdown. I'm Laurence, CEO of City Science, and I'm going to be chairing this panel session. It's great to see so many of you here. We've had over 300 registered for the webinar, so welcome. As we all know, COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented shock to the global economy, to our everyday lives and to the ways that we interact. It's certainly clear to me that this crisis, more than any that we've experienced in our lifetimes, is going to have profound impacts on our travel and land use behaviours, both in the short, medium and longer term. Each of these phases is likely to have some unique characteristics, and I think it throws up many questions for all of us. How often are we going to travel? How exactly are our patterns of travel going to change? What are the impacts on mode choice, capacity and other planning considerations? And of course, there are many others that we're going to cover today. And against this backdrop of unprecedented uncertainty, transport planners, modellers and policymakers are going to have to make decisions that hopefully put us on a trajectory that captures some of the positives that have been borne out through the crisis, but also decisions that mitigate against some of those potential ongoing risks that we're likely to face. Thankfully, we're joined by some expert speakers and panellists today to give their views on what we need to do to plan, prepare and manage the Active Travel Restart. We're joined by Councillor Robert Mitchell, Deputy Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Essex County Council, Mal Garrick, Principal Transport Officer at Cornwall Council, Simon Lusby, Head of Transport Planning at City Science, Roger Geffen, Policy Director of Cycling UK, and Alexander Baldwin-Smith, City Planner at Transport for London. So we're going to start the webinar with 3-minute introductions from each of our guests before moving on to a panel session where we'll be posing your questions to the panel. You'll hopefully see the functionality to ask questions in the bottom right hand of your screen. So please feel free to post any questions that you want to cover. All we ask is that when you do post a question, please include your name and organisation and we'll make sure we attribute them to you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Councillor Mitchell to discuss how Essex have been responding to the crisis. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Laurence, and good afternoon, everybody. This is a really nice opportunity to help explain what we're doing in Essex. So Essex, for those who don't know, is a largely rural county with a mixture of market towns and villages. We've got 13 different boroughs and districts and one small city, all of which provide good opportunities for walking and cycling. In addition, our relatively flat topography has a very dry climate, which makes cycling particularly attractive, although my grass is looking very brown already. While many people are working from home, not everyone is able to. And given the government advice to avoid public transport, ECC, Essex County Council, have been proactively responding to the current health emergency, as well as Grant Shapps' call to action from early May to encourage as many people as possible to walk and cycle where they can. This comprises a pipeline of planned schemes in our town and city centres and in some of our high streets in the first instance, which will not only enable social distancing so that people can access shops and services as they reopen, but also encourages residents to consider walking and or cycling to and from the nearest town centres as the safest and easiest way to get around. It's really important to enable the choice by prioritising certain routes which links to the wider existing walking and cycling networks. Of course, urban unitary authorities have already been slightly ahead in their plans because they are often in areas of high density, and with only one tier they can respond very quickly. As a highways authority, we are equally ambitious in our thinking, but it's important that we work with our local authority partners to consider schemes developed with local knowledge so that what we implement meets the social distancing objectives, but it's also flexible so that we can understand what works and rebuild confidence in our centres and our high streets. There are lots of things we have to do in locking in the benefits for this following the lockdown. We need to manage mode share expectations. Unless something is done, people will go back to their old normal. And I don't think it'll ever be an old normal. It's going to be a new normal, and people will think of their old cars as the safest transport method. The industry is at a critical time to make sure people don't return to old habits, and we've got the opportunity now. Leadership is key. We've led from the top in providing strong support for both our emergency measures and active travel in general. Essex have been really keen to support the government desire to restart the economy, as well as focusing on how we support local businesses, particularly in our economic centres. We need to certainly engage with local knowledge, where we're working at an accelerated rate through partnership working with local authorities, stakeholders and colleagues, and has resulted in an emerging COVID response programme across Essex. Communication is obviously key for these opportunities to work properly. Working with Essex Highways and Essex County Council communication teams, we're developing bespoke comms relating to the measures as they're implemented. A wider package is being developed to continue the change and ensure that people choose to walk and cycle for short journeys. So phase 1 of our rapid response are measures which are key to enabling physical distancing, which support public health, considering density, footfall and impact. These early city and town centre measures are expected to be on the ground in a matter of weeks. Phase 2 measures will act as trials, test and learn, and may accelerate existing projects and schemes to support the local economy using frugal innovations, including our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, our LC WIPs, with strategic walking and cycling corridors. In addition, we're looking to bring forward some existing capital programme schemes that help improve facilities for walking and cycling. Hybrid cycle tracks and replacement bridges being brought forward with the intention of delivery this summer. And phase 3 of our approach will be medium to long-term measures, which represent a transition phase to full local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, town centre regeneration and sustainable transport schemes. So I hope that helps set our stall.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And now we hand over to Mail Garrick, Principal Transport Officer at Cornwall Council.
Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of what we are looking at in Cornwall regarding this COVID crisis. First of all, I want to stress that we are a unitary authority as well, so we've got quite broad responsibilities in terms of transport. A lot of people are looking at Cornwall as a prominently rural local authority, but in fact we've got a lot of small towns, what I would call an archipelago of small towns. So we've got a very mixed rural and urban layout. So we were quite surprised by the effect of the crisis, but in fact we've seen 62% dip in motorized traffic level. So it shows that actually we could rely a lot less on cars potentially, and we've seen quite a huge hike in cycling and walking. So we can surely do better than what we did before. So we're still trying to measure what happened and what is happening here. Regarding solutions, so before that we had declared climate change emergency, so we had already quite a comprehensive climate change emergency plan that is more middle and long term, but regarding more immediate solutions, we are looking at 3 main actions. So one which is, I think, more medium term because it will take a bit of time to be implemented, was a number of e-bikes networks. So we're looking at investing in electric bikes. Just one caveat here. What I'm going to say here has not necessarily been vetted by our councillors. So this is very much what we are researching within our transport service. So electric bike networks, we're looking at why electric bikes? Because of the Cornish topography. I'm sure those of you who have some connections with Cornwall or have been holidaying know that the topography is quite hilly. So we believe very much that there's a lot of potential here to tap into. And we've seen actually a lot of people buying electric bikes, and I think the local retailers have been passing this message around. They've really experienced this rush. The second action is working differently and commuting differently. So we are prioritizing right now the council itself, putting our house in order, and we are looking at how we could make people work from home a lot more, potentially, well, researching solutions as drastic as 2-3 days, maybe up to 4 days, maybe from home, and also maybe mix solutions with a few days from home and a few days from local offices. So I recall a figure. For example, we've got approximately, I think, 1,700 people working in our capital, so in Truro, in our offices. And of them, I believe it was 500 of them were coming from Newquay every day. So it shows that actually having a few offices in other towns could make a huge difference in terms of traffic. And the third action, because I don't want to last too long, is obviously as a lot of local authorities have done, so walking and cycling temporary infrastructure. So I think we've listed 28 small infrastructure changes that we could make on the highway for limited cost. So it could be pedestrianizing some high street in some of our towns, could be freeing some lanes for active travel or public transport, but we are mostly talking about public transport here, or it could be as small as just installing a few planters to deter people parking in wrong locations. So there's this array of solutions that we have designed, and we've got very much in mind the sense of urgency of this crisis, because we're expecting people to come back to work by car mostly. So we know that on a large portion of our road network, there is already significant congestion. So we are very much looking at an emergency to keep the local authority working, so Cornwall working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mal. Very interesting on electric bikes, and certainly some questions already coming through around electric bikes. I'm sure we'll pick that up later. So next, we're going to hand over to Simon Lusby. Simon.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm Simon. I'm the head of transport planning at City Science. So we try and provide, or we do provide, clear insights, interactive tools, and strategies to tackle causes of climate change. I was previously at Transport for London, was a transport planning manager there, reviewing relevant documents to this and programs such as contributing to the Healthy Streets for London, strategic cycling analysis, the early forms of what Alex Sanders is going to be presenting, as well cycle superhighways, and to name a few. So I've got a lot of experience in this from a transport point of view in London. I also have training in the service space from New Zealand, and including transport planning, design, and appraisal. So to me, the pressing issue here is how do we use this momentum that we've seen in active travel to support us tackling climate change going forward? So how do we do this? Yes, we've seen an uptake in active travel, and we hear a lot about this new normal, but it's far from normal for anyone, I'm sure, particularly for those who have kids in their houses at the moment. And it's also, to me, it's very temporary. And what we're going to see very soon is a lot of people get back in their cars. Either that's going to be when the schools reopen next week and the week after, people getting in their cars to drive their kids to school because they're not comfortable with the kids walking. And so how do we get that active travel into schools, into school travel and other elements like that as they come on board before we lose those opportunities? Also, this pandemic's changed a lot of people's lives. So many people are unable to work from home. And but we also could see quite large unemployment coming through from this. So we need to be thinking, how do we, for those people who can't work from home, how do we support them, whether that's active travel or public transport? Also, yes, a lot of us are transport planners, or possibly on this call, and we can work from a desk, but all those people who are non-office based or live too far from between their homes and works, they're going to need other options. They won't be able to walk and cycle. But what we've seen is these measures, these active travel measures, are going to free up a lot of space on public transport. We need to do that right now because public transport just is not a viable alternative. But as that becomes a viable alternative again, we need to see the switch from people who would previously have driven, taking up that previous space on public transport or active travel, and those people who have taken up active travel and moved away from public transport to stay with active travel. We need to see that shift. And that means that what we need as well is the support behind that, the policies behind that in terms of congestion charging, lower speed limits, and also making sure that we keep the space for active travel and the space for public transport, keep those public transport services reliable throughout this and moving forward, whether that's 24-hour bus lanes or ensuring they have access into centres. We also want to, we need to be using data to actually evidence where there is this untapped potential for public transport. Sorry, of course I have it. Where there is the untapped potential for active travel, and whether that's using topography and analysis to work out hilliness and how we can resolve some of that, or just catchment analysis and population analysis and projections. So we need to be really relying on the evidence and the data that can inform this. We also have to be looking at how do we resolve the fact that congestion might come back, parking requirements could start to increase, and car ownership could start to increase as well. So how do we use active travel to actually flip that and increase active trips for local trips, whether that's going to the shops or just getting to your local station. And then we also need to be thinking a little bit about the freight industry, because the freight industry is a big player here. They've had to change a lot in these times. And how can we support them with this as well? So making sure that they still have access into zones. If we make new zones active zones in neighborhood zones, how do we make it so that freight also has can get in there and do it safely? And so finally, just to sum up, it's important that we evidence and monitor our approach and have a robust and impartial data that's informing it. Active travel's got a major part to play in this recovery and in our future, but it can't sustain the volumes previously on public transport, and nor can it compete with private cars unless we support it with suitable policy interventions. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. I think a lot of important themes there: demand management, schools, all getting great questions coming through. So next, going to hand over to Roger Geffen from Cycling UK. Roger. Roger is still muted.
Yes, I was just finding the unmute button. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much for inviting me. Can I have my slides, please, Mark? Great, good. Okay, so go to the next one. That's just to introduce Cycling UK. We're a membership charity, for those of you who don't know us, 68,000 members. We've been around since 1878, but we have provide a whole range of benefits, including cycling activities for our members, but we are first and foremost a charity for cycling rather than a membership organisation for cyclists. We run these sort of practical projects that you see illustrated there to reach beyond the existing male-dominated, middle-class dominated, health-conscious, whatever, to make cycling in Britain much more like it is in the Netherlands, where in a situation where people of all ages and abilities, male and female alike, cycle for as a normal activity. 26% of trips in the Netherlands compared with 2% here. We're very much about kind of creating that context. So what have we? Next slide. What have we been doing in the current situation? We have been pressing both national and local governments throughout the UK to seize the opportunities that other speakers before me have talked about. We had an online action which over 10,000 people have contacted their councils to say, please do this sort of stuff, and it's been, and as well as pressing the four governments of the UK to put the funding in place. Now the UK governments have all in different ways acted very seized this initiative. 250 million of short-term funding for measures to reduce pop-up cycle lanes, road closures, 20 mph speed limits, and some guidance around all of those things. That is excellent. That's fantastic opportunities for local authorities to be seizing. 40 local authorities have have been responding to with plans or actual measures in place, and we've got a map which you can see a snapshot of there of where we've heard about action taking place. So that, and I'm sure there is more to come, as we're already hearing. Next one, next slide. So I think even now the things are moving so quickly, and the justification for putting these sort of measures in is already changing. And this very much kind of relates to Councillor Mitchell's 3 phases. During the lockdown, we're now really moving into phase 2 of this. During the lockdown, there was obviously a lot of discussion about enabling the key workers to get to the hospitals, keep the bits of society that were still moving, to enable them to move when public transport wasn't there because of the social distancing requirements. As we start to move out of lockdown and start contemplating schools and businesses reopening, but as people have said, others have said, with constraints still there in public transport, we've got to make sure we don't get a return of a tidal wave of traffic. So we've got to use that space now, but we've also got to be looking a little further ahead to sort of how do we then kind of recover from this crisis in a way that leaves us better prepared to deal with the much bigger looming crisis of climate change that others have particularly Mayo have alluded to. What should this look like? Next slide. Firstly, the important bit is to be thinking about planning networks, not just individual routes. The propensity to cycle tool is a tool that many local authorities are already aware of for planning networks, not just disconnected cycle facilities where there's a bit of spare space and a bit of spare cash. Think about getting a network in quickly using the sort of temporary measures that we'll see on the next slide. That first screenshot at the top is the propensity to cycle tool. It allows you to see where is there potential, where are the main corridors of potential demand for switch to cycle. The second screenshot is some maps that have been created by the same team. Well, actually, the cycling infrastructure prioritisation toolkit, which is very much the same people from Leeds University. And they've done 10 maps of 10 key cities, but tomorrow I believe they're due to unveil mapping like this for the whole of England. Sorry to those from Scotland and Wales, but this works in England so far. To enable you to see where the roads that are wide enough and which have the greatest potential to switch from public transport to cycling. Given that this is particularly a kind of how do we avert, how do we enable people to get around who would otherwise be very public transport dependent, and then use the sort of design advice that's available from Berlin and from America. I'll make sure we can circulate. So if there's a means of circulating links to everyone who's participated, I'll provide the links to those guidance documents from Berlin and America. We will be producing some too. Next slide. A few key design principles. While we're still in lockdown, temporary cycle lanes need to be wider than normal cycle lanes to allow the cyclists to socially distance from the pedestrians on the pavement. So this is one reason why we've got to do things in this kind of, in this phased approach. Why, we're going to have to do things differently from what happens permanently. Use the sort of infrastructure you can see there. The top slide is what are known as traffic ones, things that stand up. They can be moved later. This is particularly relevant if you're using experimental traffic orders and therefore monitoring the schemes that you put in to see whether they should be made permanent, as distinct from temporary measures. Pavement widenings might be temporary because it's only about social distancing. The pavement would normally be wide enough, but the cycle facilities and the road closures are much more likely to be sort of experimental orders, and please monitor them so that you've got the evidence base to sort of assess whether they should in fact be made permanent. And those sort of measures that you can see there, the traffic ones, or the one you can see below that from Berlin, and then the really beautiful street design that you can see in that I'm pretty sure that was an American example, just helps to make the case that this isn't just about walking and cycling, this is about nicer streets. Okay, next, last slide, I think. Yes, so just referring back to the Grant Shapps' announcement has already been mentioned, the funding, but earlier that month he'd also produced this transport decarbonisation plan with this fantastic quote: public transport and active travel will be the natural first choices for our daily activities. We will use our cars less. So it's against that background that we need to prepare for respond to the COVID crisis in a way that also prepares ourselves for the climate crisis, and for that matter, the congestion and pollution and road danger and physical inactivity crisis that have been there all along. So I hope that that kind of sets the context that this is both a short-term issue and a long-term issue. I heard Chris Boardman from Greater Manchester say yesterday, what we do in the next 20 weeks will set the tone for the next 20 years. And I think that was a brilliant way of summing up where the situation we now find ourselves in, the opportunity we now have for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. And last but not least, Alexander Baldwin-Smith from TfL.
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you to our panelists there for interesting little sort of setting out their stalls. So we go to the first slide, please. This next one after that. Excellent. So this sets out the Mayor's street-based plan vision. So at TfL, we recognise that London faces a unique challenge in its transport history as we restart from a COVID-19 lockdown. As the city reopened, it's essential we provide the conditions for an active travel restart to allow for social distancing on our public transport networks, which we know will be under stress, and to provide the space for key workers on them, of course. In doing so, we'll not only provide the space on public transport, but we'll also support the health and well-being of Londoners and support the economic recovery of the capital and the wider UK. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. Providing more opportunities to walk and cycle in areas where there are no demand and benefit is vital for realising the potential that we have for walking and cycling as the restart takes hold. But we'll require careful consideration of the type and location of the interventions. Let's going to touch a little bit more on the challenges here. I think it's been touched on by all the other panellists so far. We know that we need to run our public transport networks at lower capacity due to social distancing, and we know that the car is likely to become more attractive because of the sense of safety it may provide. But we know that there are risks associated with the car-borne recovery. Obviously, London's had ambitious targets for some time now to move towards more active and sustainable modes. So we know a risk to safety, public health, economic recovery, and the environment. So therefore, what we do now is really crucial for the future. Next slide, please. And this sets out here a little bit in terms of quite visually where we know the challenges would be in terms of increasing car use, but also the opportunity in terms of increasing walking and cycling and active travel from the lockdown restart. Go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So TfL's world-leading street-based plan is a bold and ambitious vision to deliver temporary cycle loops to extend the strategic cycle network, provide additional space in town centres for walking and social distancing, and also at transport hubs, accelerate the delivery of low-traffic neighbourhoods and also school streets. And that was a point touched on by our panellists about the importance of schools. The plan will help us to facilitate local economic recovery and all three of these elements, so school streets, the low-traffic neighbourhoods, the cycle routes, and also the working town centres, are needed to try and avoid this car-based recovery in London. And TfL is working with boroughs at pace now to delivering these. So we just look at some of the benefits of the plan. I think we all know enabling social distancing is absolutely vital. That's one of the key benefits we'll have in the short term. Encouraging Londoners to not use public transport, but to walk and cycle wherever possible. Again, that's a key benefit in the short term. And focusing on a strategic movement providing for walking and cycling. But then moving into the more medium term, that recovery phase. So in the next 6 months or so as we go forward, what are the benefits there? So we know if we get the right schemes, so the right schemes based in data, the right schemes based in evidence, and knowing where that demand is and knowing where the benefits will be, we'll unlock health and well-being benefits. We can improve the public transport offer and keep it a really quality offer as people can come back to the public transport network as capacity can be reintroduced. And finally, we'll be supporting the economic recovery of London, the UK, and also London's town centres. So supporting local economic recovery is really vital, as I think people have seen how important their local town centres are, local village centres are as part of this lockdown. And as part of that, I think it's been touched on before, the impact on freight. You know, freight is absolutely vital. So supporting business through clean last mile delivery freight. So really focusing on what the future of our high streets can look like in terms of supporting them economically, but also in terms of active travel, both to get there for people and the freight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. So a couple of questions around will the slides be available? Yes, they will. So I guess the first thing that I want to ask the panel really is, do you think that the measures that are available now you think they're sufficient to really deliver the new normal? So what's the panel's views on how prepared and how many powers local authorities really have to deliver this future that we want? Roger, do you want to start?
Okay, well, actually, I think that the powers are probably there. There are other respects in which I think, you know, in the longer term, I mean, there are all sorts of things that we need to be able to do about junctions that I hope will arise from the review of the Highway Code that the Department of Transport has promised, and has in fact been started behind the scenes. And that, you know, once we start kind of introducing changes to the rules on who has priority, what, you know, enabling pedestrians and cyclists to have greater priority at junctions of all kinds, junctions and crossing points of all kinds, that will open up an awful lot of new opportunities. But that is probably more for the sort of the longer term things, the things that need harder engineering than the kind of pop-up infrastructure we're talking about now. I think that the sort of the experimental and temporary traffic order processes, I'll wait and see what local authority representatives say. I think you've got the resources there in that respect. My one concern is local authorities being very overstretched just in terms of human capacity to do all this stuff. And I think at that point, we will certainly be briefing our members and supporters to engage as, you know, fully constructively, but do also use those maps that I was talking about as the starting point for that dialogue, the stuff that the Leeds University team will be producing from tomorrow. It will only come out in effectively a sort of beta form tomorrow. I'll feed back to them on you know, anything that you can see in your area that is wrong, and they will be updating those maps and finalising them over the next 2 weeks. But I think that those sort of resources are there. There are more things that need to be done over the longer term, but I think hopefully you've got what you need, other than shortage of personnel possibly is, I think, the biggest capacity constraint, rather than regulating powers at this point.
From some of our local panelists, how do you feel about the powers and about the resources that you have available to implement some of these temporary TROs? Sure.
So can I answer resources here? I think we've rarely been, at least for Cornwall, we've rarely been so busy in the transport department. We're doing quite a lot. In fact, we were already quite busy because of the climate change emergency projects. So this has come on top of all. So quite obviously it has done well. The current crisis had given a kick, you know, to all of that. So we had a boost, you know, in terms of well, this is the big emergency now. So we need to prioritize these actions that were already sometimes designed. As you said, Roger, at some point we are meeting the fact that we don't have 1,000 designers, policy officers, and engineers to do all of that. So we need to prioritize. I think, yeah, we have already a lot of the tools to do that. Sometimes also we lacked in financial resources sometimes to deliver some of the schemes, because we were looking for not necessarily gold-plated solutions, but, you know, proper solutions that met every standard. Now we're trying to have a more experimental way to do things, to also allow us to interact more with the communities. And I think that's the key thing here. When you need to deliver a new policy or a new project, you need three things to line. You need the public, your councillors, and you need the council staff to be, you know, involved in the project. It's way easier when you've got a strong community proposing projects or advocating projects, because suddenly the councillors become a lot more relaxed about the whole project and say, okay, so that's fine. It won't be too polemic. I'm going to have the community with me, so I'm going to be comfortable to ask our teams to, you know, invest some time and money in that. So I think the best thing we've seen so far was this huge push in the community, this whole community phenomenon happening, and people really being interested and wanting some more investment in cycling and walking, because this is helping a lot the officers delivering that.
Yep. Councillor Mitchell, do you have something to add?
Just trying to get in the mute button. I get there in the end. I think there's an awful lot of funneling in this. The opportunity we have now, the sort of phase one opportunity, is to introduce stuff that people are not familiar with. The key to that is communication, bring the public alongside, as Mel was quite correctly saying, public engagement, and flexible schemes that can be adjusted, and we learn as we go along, because we are all in the same boat. So if you're trying to buy some water-filled barriers at the moment, you can't. They've all gone. So, you know, it's that sort of thing that is going to be separating the space, increased separation of space, as was mentioned as well, in order to deal with the social distancing. But when one gets back to a new normal, this is pushing both cyclists and vehicle drivers down the same bit of highway, which has been repurposed. So we're squeezing everything in a little bit, not in all cases, because the other argument and the discussion that needs to be had is about developers and about them putting in sustainable cycleways with what else is being put in. Of course, they won't like that because they may feel it needs more space. But if people have by that stage from COVID got the message that we've got so much development going on around the country, that all of this is going to have a major impact. We have to have a new normal in development, and it includes the ability to put the onus on people who want to build large amount of houses to make sure that they provide sustainable transport methods at the same time. It's the same as putting your drains in. We put in broadband all the time. You don't build a new housing estate without putting in broadband. We have to not build new housing estates without putting in the ability to walk and cycle safely with cars, because not everybody can work on either by foot or cycle.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to change the subject slightly, and that's towards making sure that our policies address the needs of the greatest number of people. Is there a danger that with the speed at which we're implementing these things, we don't necessarily consider all of the needs of the widest diverse group? So a couple of questions coming through on the chat. One from Laurence Stevenson from Active Travel Academy, asking how we can ensure we get diversity into our policies, and from Sarah Gayton, who asks how we're making spaces available for partially sighted, blind people and those with mobility needs.
I mean, the point is a well made one. It's one of the issues that is addressed in both the NACTO and the German guidance that I mentioned. It's a really important point that we provide inclusive infrastructure, that we create facilities that work for disabled pedestrians and indeed for disabled cyclists. Actually, the issues of disabled cycling are under-recognised. The range of different types of pedal cycle that are available for disabled cyclists is not sufficiently known. The design constraints that affect disabled cyclists tend to be about either upstands, sort of steps, or narrowings, including the sort of access barriers. Now, in an era of physical distancing, those are going to be less of an issue because we're all thinking about having plenty of width and plenty of space between one another. The issues are going to be more complex when we get to more permanent infrastructure rather than the pop-up infrastructure, where I'm very aware that the blind and partially sighted group, including Sarah Gayton's organisation, are very concerned about bus stop bypasses. We're not going to be doing pop-up bus stop bypasses. A bus stop bypass is not something you can just pop up. It takes much more design. There is more of a discussion to be had about bus stop bypasses, but that's not what we're going to be doing at this stage. We're going to be accepting at this point that that pedal cycles and buses are going to have to cross one another's paths, unless we take there is one solution from the German guidance, where the cycle track sort of effectively goes on the inside of a whole row of parked cars, at which point is a completely separate thing. And yeah, that also raises design issues for blind and partially sighted people. I don't imagine we're going to be doing that much of that straight away, but I'd be interested to know if any of the local authority reps think otherwise. But there are still longer term issues around the interaction between blind and partially sighted pedestrians and cycle facilities.
Alex, Councillor Mitchell, Mal, how are you considering this in your regions?
Just taking that point, it's a very good point, it's very well made. I think that it's obviously an issue. We often have recycling infrastructure, bus bypass reference. I think CFL has done a lot of research pre-COVID into this. In the COVID era, our guidance to boroughs quite clearly states that equalities, diversity and accessibility do need to be considered. So we're very much seized about the boroughs who be putting their bids in for cycle routes, low traffic neighbourhoods, town centres. But we have really asked them to consider that from the start, to consider it throughout the design process of their schemes. So it's very much in there. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to comment on particular interventions, but I think that it is key that that is considered right from the start. Obviously, access is really important as well for those groups who need access to those areas that are closing streets, and also the general design is absolutely vital to be considering these at all times. So we are making sure it's inside of our guidance.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I would quite agree. I mean, in Essex, we're already working with partially sighted groups, for instance, and there will be plenty of measures which they are testing and feeding back directly to Essex Highways. I think I did mention it at the beginning, and that's not to say that anybody's forgotten it. It's just to say that we continue need to bang on about communications. Communications are absolutely key. They're probably the cheapest way of getting messages across and getting people to change their habits. The whole business about sustainable transport, actually, we keep on talking about electric. We don't talk a little bit like recycling. We don't talk about reducing. Reduce, reuse, recycle is the same principle in road traffic. What we need for the planet, what we need for sustainability, is not to build houses that only have one parking space and try and force people to only have one car. Is to actually provide enough space so it can be shared for whatever method of transport can be used. To be sensible about it and get the message across. In the end, it'll probably come down to taxes for either fuel or hydrogen or electric or whatever it happens to be. There isn't enough resource in the world to provide enough batteries for the number of cars we've got in the world at the moment, if they were all to become electric. So we have to think outside the box. This is an opportunity. It's part of that funnel. We're in the big hole in the funnel, which is the old normal, and we need to try and shrink that a little bit so people realize that we need to look at a new normal that has a different way of looking at things.
Simon, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the wider demographics as well. So a key element there is data, and we saw that from some of the presentations of we need to be thinking about actually what are the users that are going to be using this, and therefore what type of interventions as well do we need to be considering. And a key one there is that speed side of things. So reducing speed limits has got to be a number one priority. Reduce speed limits, reduce the amount of traffic, increase the number of people walking and cycling, and you will actually create a safer environment for those people. If cars using some of these environments actually see more people cycling, they'll expect to see more people cycling, and therefore they'll be more likely to use it. But also, we look at this panel, and there's a few consistencies amongst this panel which I hadn't noticed before, which is really poor of me. But we also have seen that with cycling in the past, and there's definitely different demographics with public transport. So if those are the people who are going to be switching over, we need to be providing infrastructure that people are more comfortable on, and that means linking up green spaces, quieter streets, segregation, whether that's with bollards or filled up tanks or whatever we can, or planters. Just closing down streets completely so there's more of an environment. And I think that's how we can really unlock those other demographics into this.
Thank you. So I think that brings us on nicely, actually, to start a segue into demand management. So we've got a few questions on the question panel coming through, but really question how sustainable this active travel behaviour really is. So David Winterburn asks whether people are using active travel because of COVID or simply because of the good weather. Gareth Elphick asks, will we be able to sustain active travel into the winter months? What do the panel think we need to do as we move to that kind of second phase, as more and more people come back to using their cars for the school drop-off, and as we enter into winter, when there's going to be less demand for cycling?
Maybe I can answer on that one. So, as Councillor Mitchell said, there's something which is really important in terms of transport, which is planning. Because planning basically conditions what kind of transport demand you will have. So when we look at the equation of where should we invest in active travel, we see in Cornwall that despite the fact that we are supposedly a rural area, we've got a lot of places where we've got a lot of road congestion, mainly because people rely very much on cars and also take the car a lot, well, way too much sometimes. But basically, yeah, we've got severely congested area despite the fact that we are a rural authority. So we need to actually promote active travel a lot more in a number of areas where we've got really an emergency in terms of making sure that these areas are carrying on, you know, functioning properly. So it's not even just, you know, sustainable, well, ecology, you know, it's the whole sustainability aspect of it, because you're starting to harm the economy and the rest and society at some point very heavily, and you notice it. So I've got a number of new developments in mind where, yeah, we are actively planning for a good share of the population here to rely on active travel to go to work and access basic services. Another thing that Councillor Mitchell, I think, was pointing at was the fact that we can't keep just saying, oh yeah, well, the cars will do that. This is not possible, because we know that in 20, 30 years time, a vast majority, maybe even less than that, a vast majority of the cars will be electric, and we won't be able to produce all those electric cars. Plus, there's the fact that the electric car doesn't solve the problem of congestion or some of the pollution. So we need to work a lot more in terms of improving planning, planning differently on neighborhoods, planning for making the most of active travel, of making the most of public places, public environment, and having people being in contact with the environment, because we need that. We know that we are going to rely on that to ensure a lot of this transport. Arguably, in a number of new neighborhoods that are delivered today, we are wasting a lot of place on roads and on car parks and parking bays and carports. And when you look at it, there's plenty of space to be reused and reimagined and reshuffled to find solutions for more sustainable transport, be it public transport or active travel.
Can I just come in, because I also wanted to completely endorse what both Councillor Mitchell and Mel Garrick have both been saying about the importance of planning. Couldn't agree with what you both said, and indeed that point about, you know, it's got to be more than electric cars, and I think you both made that point very, very clearly. There's research that shows that if we're to meet our carbon budgets, we would, even on the most optimistic assumptions about how quickly we decarbonise, we go battery electric for the vehicle fleet and how quickly we decarbonise their power supply, we would still need a road traffic reduction of about 20% by 2030. And on the government's assumptions, or the government's assumptions when they were still talking about phasing out battery electric cars by 2040 rather than bringing it forward, then we would need, on their earlier assumptions, we'd have needed a 60% reduction in road traffic, which is huge because traffic is still growing. The opportunity around planning, there is an opportunity around planning. And I cite this in the context of some other things that Grant Shapps said at the same time as announcing the 250 million. He also announced that there would be a cycling or walking, not a new cycling walking investment strategy, that'll come next year, but an update to the current one, and that would come out with some new cycling design standards, along with an inspectorate that will make sure that those design standards are consistently applied, not just in highway and traffic schemes, but in new developments. Now, let's link that then to the fact that the government is also planning is also due to release a planning white paper. It was only in early March that they said it would be out in the spring. Clearly, it'll end up being delayed. We don't know quite when. But once that new cycling infrastructure guidance is out, we then need to really work to make sure that it is incorporated into the planning white, what emerges from the planning white paper, so that new developments are consistently designed and located where they are going to be cycle accessible, public transport accessible, pedestrian accessible, and with street layouts and cycle parking and all those design features within the development that make cycling walking normal, because people don't use their cars just simply because they have some, as it were, ingrained preference for the car. It's just simply because it's the most convenient option. If we start designing our developments in the way that the Dutch design new developments, such as Houten in the Netherlands, designed at about the time as Milton Keynes and Peterborough, and yet it's got so much higher mode share for cycling because they designed it with traffic restraint as well as good cycling and walking infrastructure. We get that written into the planning system, then we will no longer have this idea that cycling and walking policies don't really apply in rural areas. We used to have it that cycling and walking policies didn't apply in the UK at all. Then London started doing it, and then everyone started saying, well, London's different. Then Manchester started doing it, and everyone's saying, but cities are different. So it's really heartening to hear two shire counties saying, well, no, we can do it too. But planning is really making that work.
I think take the point around new developments. So one of the questions from Scott Ainsley, I don't know what organisation you were with, Scott, but Scott notes that major roads in London are increasingly filling up with motorists again. Is there something explicit that we need to do to manage the demand on existing roads? One, to help promote cycling, and two, to make sure that people don't default to just getting back into their cars. Alexander, you wanted to come in, and then we'll go to Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I was going to take the previous question, or moving slightly away from new development. I think to make sure we keep up the active travel into the winter and after the immediate restart periods finish, it's about what's delivered now needs to be quality. So quality. Make sure it's joined up, make sure the infrastructure really works, and make sure that it's convenient to you. It has to be competitive with jumping in the car. It has to be competitive with public transport, obviously, if we want to free up the space on those networks. So I say quality, and obviously make sure whatever is built now is in the right place as well. So those data sets, TfL, obviously, we have a lot of data we can mine, understand, and analyse. But although in every country, I'd say any data that you understand where that demand is, understand how the individual people living in those areas will respond, because it's vital that we understand what we're doing, but also why we're doing it. So we get the right intervention to the right place, to the right people, and it's the right modal response that we're achieving from them. In terms of our major roads, obviously, we have our street space plan in London, and that is reallocating street space on the TLRN network, and boroughs are putting their bids in as we speak, reallocate street space on their network. So reallocating that space to walking and cycling across those four themes that I mentioned before. So it's absolutely happening. It's absolutely vital that we do this, but so that we can go through this restart period as we go into the longer term, evaluate what's been successful and what needs to be modified.
Councillor Mitchell.
So I've got other things bonging in the meanwhile. Yes, back to the demand management slightly, but I agree also with some of Alex's points. It is a lot easier in an urban environment to maybe put in an alternative route, maybe to make one ways, which also help to slow things down to a certain extent, as long as people aren't complete fools, but help with safety, certainly when it's mixed with traffic and cycling and walking. But one of the issues, for instance, parking on footways, which of course isn't a problem in London because it's been illegal for years, but it is a problem in the rurals. it isn't a desperate problem, so long as the DfT hurry up and give us the ability to deal with obstruction parking, where in the rural areas, we can put in areas where it is safe and sensible to use a little bit of the footway, so long as we have sensible space behind to allow people to walk, so 4 foot or thereabouts, because it does help to slow down traffic on the main highway if you're half parked on the pavement. Just the same as I think Simon was saying, if you've got loads of people cycling, then it will slow down the traffic. If you have a convoy of lorries with the Scout Carnival on it, you tend not to get problems. Sorry. You tend not to get problems at the time, but of course it's very short notice. We need to look at segregated cycleways to start with, to certainly initially, until the modal changes happen, because those funnels are a different shape. It's basically a great long pipe, which you have to put in constrictions to change people's modal shift, isn't it? It can't be quick. We can't hit it with a sledgehammer because people won't pay a blind bit of attention, or they'll get very grumpy about it. We have to do it gently, and now's a really good time to do it. The same business about the weather. It's another funnel. If people do it now, certainly in Essex, where it's nice and warm and dry and not a problem at all, and then when it starts getting wet in the winter, if they've got used to it in the summer and in the autumn, etc., then they're more likely to continue into the winter. But it's the perception of safety quite often, which is not the same as the actual safety. You only need a couple of, you only need somebody to get taken out by the inside turning of an HGV for it to blow up the whole argument that everything's unsafe. There are loads of examples in other countries, especially in the Netherlands, where you have a lovely big T junction with little islands on the corner so that the HGVs aren't going to take them out and the cycles can sort of nip in between. There's some really good design, but the other problem we've got, of course, is transport planning. We have been for years going down the same sort of transport planning routes. We're going to have to rethink that a little bit when we start constricting the amount of space that is available to those people who still continue to use cars.
Okay, great, thank you. That, I think, leads us on to thinking a bit about some of the longer distance trips. So a question from Pretty Go Hill, who asks, walking and cycling have significant limitations in terms of distance travelled. In some countries, you can see buses that carry bikes. Is this something that could be useful for rural or peri-urban areas? Obviously, I think public transport is also key and is being deeply impacted by COVID-19. And I think one of the other comments that came out of the Mail's presentation was around electric bikes, and another question around e-scooters. What role do electric bikes, e-scooters and public transport have to play in promoting longer distance trips?
Just on long distance, I don't know if I can just answer. I think, yeah, there's something with long distance. Obviously, you can really cycle for too long. There's a maximum length for that, and a lot of people are ready to cycle for way less than what you could actually be doing. I know a lot of people are really keen on cycling and can commute for really long distances, but the majority won't. I think here the question is more, you're not going to use the bike for long distances, but each transport mode has the right range of distances. Once you've said that, you still have a lot of people that would use the car for long distances quite often. So the question is, okay, but do these people really need to move like that? I think that's a different problem than active travel. I think that's a problem with demand again, and how we can sit with people and look at how they move, how they live, and how they need to move sometimes. So it might be sometimes that you need to commute for a long time, but actually, do you need to move from, I don't know, commute from Plymouth to Exeter every day, from Plymouth to Penzance every day? I'm sure you don't necessarily need that. You can actually work from home on a number of days. Your employer could hire a shared workplace for 2 days a week. I mean, there are plenty of things like that that are more about how you live and how we organize life rather than purely transport. So I think that's where we need to find solutions here. On another side, yeah, in Cornwall we are delivering long distance cycleways as well. I'm sure a lot of people will use them for commuting and day-to-day trips, but I think we expect more people to use them as a recreational facility and as, you know, touristic as well facilities. Actually, they're really great assets in terms of economic assets. They pretty much pay for themselves. That's what we've noticed when we did a bit of research on these you know, green ways, as they call them in France or in other countries. That's my answer on this one.
Can I come in on this one as well?
Yeah.
The key thing for the infrastructure as well is it needs to be well sealed, and that's going to help with your seasonality because less puddles. But also, the less interruption, the more priority those routes have, then the drivers or other people in other options will be able to see them going past and see how good that option is. So not merging it back into the traffic is always a pro. But also, the better that link is, and you can see this if anyone goes to Auckland and sees the Northwestern Cycleway, it is a straight line straight down the side of the motorway, which sounds weird, like it's off. So don't get me wrong, it's not right up against it. It's nice, but that means that you can travel quite a long distance without as much effort and without the interaction of effort. So your generalized journey cost is actually down as well. So it's about connecting those things up. I think bikes on buses is a backward step here. We're moving towards more micro mobility. We're moving towards shared mobility. I mean, it might work in some areas, don't get me wrong, but I think you'll be more looking at bike parking at stations, at bus stops, shared mobility, and then also the e-bike and e-scooters to be able to help you travel longer distances.
Great, thanks. Maybe it's just couple more questions to throw into the mix. I think it's still on the same theme, but Ying Jin asks, how are park and ride services going to evolve over the next 20 weeks? And Nick Hughes asks, how practical is it to increase park and ride, stride, scoot facilities on the outskirts of towns to help promote some of those longer term trips? I guess it links to what you're talking about, Simon, with regards to those interchange hubs. Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I was exactly got that. Park and stride is what we're looking at in Essex. We don't have a lot of park and rides. We've got about 3, one of which has got a temporary excess tent on it, so it's made it slightly difficult to pull back. But there are still going to be commuters. There are going to be a hell of a lot of commuters who suddenly realise that their annual season ticket, which they always moan about every time it goes out, and I sympathise with that, is only valid if you do 3 days or more. 3 days or more. They will realise as a result of COVID that they don't need to go to London or go to a major hub every day of the week. They can probably quite adequately do 2 days a week, which they'll just pay for, but making that effort. And I was in a meeting this morning about a possible rural cycleway to take from a village, for instance, that makes complete sense, but is using a community bus most of the time to travel to the local station. Connect them up to a part of an interurban network. You pull villages into there, who can quite easily, they could save their whole annual season ticket, or most of it, by going down to two days a week, and use the rest on a bit of an e-bike, which gets them the 3 or 4 miles from the village on a decent cycleway that is off-grid and is segregated from the main part of the traffic down windy country roads otherwise that are not quite as safe as they might be. But what we're looking at in Essex is transport hubs, along with park and stride, to encourage people to still use some public transport, because we are still going to have to bring back public transport in due course, and eventually this COVID thing. But it's part of the modal shift. It's part of changing the shape of the funnel. And as Mal was saying, the commuting is not going to be quite the same. I don't think the new normal commuting is going to be at all the same. E-bikes, certainly there will be people who will be using those for relatively short journeys, but it will encourage them to get a move on because they're fabulous pieces of kit. I can't afford one at the moment, but I'll happily push.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Briefly for me. Yeah. Okay. Yes, no, I think the points have been well made about, firstly, the role of planning we've talked about, the integration of cycling and public transport. That won't yield immediate answers while public transport capacity and willingness to use it is limited, but for looking further ahead, that is a huge part of the answer. E-bikes, absolutely right. I talked earlier about the propensity to cycle tool. The propensity to cycle tool has various scenarios of future potential willingness to cycle. One scenario is what happens if we took the topography and the kind of land uses and the distribution of where people live and work that we've currently got in the UK, but had the Dutch people's willingness to cycle for a given journey, including taking account of hilliness and distance. And you get a significant increase in travel in Cornwall. You get an even bigger increase once you add in an assumption that people have e-bikes, because e-bikes undermine the kind of distance, reduce the distance constraint on people's willingness to cycle, and indeed the hilliness constraint. And although in that scenario you kind of get up to Dutch levels of cycle use where nationally we're making 26-27% of trips, it doesn't get to quite those levels in hilly counties like Cornwall, low density counties. It still gets to 10%, which is an awful lot more than you've got at the moment. So e-bikes definitely part of it. But the other thing there is hire bikes, and this is perhaps part of the more immediate part of the answer. While public transport isn't going to work terribly well at the moment, but drive to a park and ride site and then get on a hire bike. Now, a number of towns and cities have hire bike schemes. We now need to have an awful lot more authorities. I really will be urging the government to make sure that some of that 250 million or the 2 billion that's available over the next few years is there to support the setup of bike sharing schemes. Taking the successes from London, I think that the current situation is going to make them much more viable, and they need a good regulatory framework to enable them to work. Can I just say something about regulatory frameworks that was prompted by one of Councillor Mitchell's earlier comments when you touched on parking enforcement? And I should have said this when you asked earlier about powers. One other thing that I think is needed here, I should have thought of it earlier, is the ability for local authorities to enforce, authorities outside London to enforce school street schemes. So this is when you introduce parking restrictions at school arrival and drop-off time. In London, you can use London authorities can use cameras to enforce that. Outside London, it's like the pavement parking restrictions. Local authorities do not have that power. It's that. For those of you familiar with it, this is Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004, the secondary legislation to enable local authorities outside London to enforce moving traffic restrictions on whether it's bus lanes, but also mandatory cycle lanes and indeed school street type restrictions. That is now really urgently needed as we start to contemplate the release of schools from lockdown.
So I think the schools issue.
I need to come back on that very quickly, if you don't mind. Actually, you normally issue a Reg 9 PCN, and we can use Reg 10 PCNs with CCTV and monitor people. It's not a moving traffic offence, but if somebody is parking on the zigzags, for instance, we can also use red lines outside schools instead of zigzags, which will use a lot less paint, and that's what we're planning in the North Essex Parking Partnership.
So I guess one final we've got 5 minutes left, so I just want to touch on the economy and I guess some of the conflicts we may have as we start to focus more on economic recovery. So Kay Wagland asks, shopping generates more journeys than commuting. How can we show that bikes are a practical mode for shopping? And I guess that's really twofold. I suspect there's some pushback from some of the businesses around whether cycling is going to generate enough footfall, traffic, and I guess for practical issues of being able to take your shopping on a bike. How does the panel feel that we can keep promoting active travel whilst also trying to get our town centres back online? Simon.
So TfL did some research a couple of years back. It was misrepresented recently, but effectively the people who are spending the most money in shops are actually those walking past them. and it's not those people who are driving past them in cars, those who are walking. It's walking, then public transport, then cycling in that approximate order. But a lot more people are spending money if they're walking. There's also a lot of deals that stores do for home deliveries where you can identify the item and then get it sent to you at an appropriate time. And that's particularly important for if it's not something that's urgent. So it might just be an outdoor table that you'd like for, you know, in the next couple of weeks or something like that. So you might identify it, buy it, and then get it delivered. So we need to be thinking about those sort of mechanisms as well, and also like other ways to carry things. So I've got a bike trailer here, and that's amazing. We can take anything on that.
Alexander?
Yeah, I think a key part is considering both walking and cycling. As I talk about cycling, obviously walking is really vital to this. So not everyone necessarily is going to want to cycle for high speed, but a lot of people can walk. It's the most accessible mode. So making sure we're promoting walking alongside cycling is really vital to encouraging an active travel recovery. Part of it, I think, is making sure our town centres are linked up to these new networks we have to make it really seamless. If you are going to walk, you are going to cycle, so it's really easy to get there. And then, of course, from the point of view of access to bikes, is there information about cargo bikes out there? Are businesses using cargo bikes for delivery? So just making sure we're considering all the options for accessing town centres, both freight and also for those visiting the town centres, to make it as easy and seamless as possible. I know it's about quality before, but it really is about linking all these interventions out to make sure that it is the obvious choice to undertake for those who are within a cyclable or walkable distance to the town centre. And as I add to that, also shopping locally too, supporting local economies. So realising what you have got locally and using those, reducing that need to perhaps travel further.
That may bring us on to one final topic, which I think is probably around freight. Obviously, COVID's had a major change in the way that people are purchasing. Obviously, we know those trends have been there, but should we be doing more to support last mile deliveries or supporting freight to enable people to purchase from home?
If I may, I think that it's a very valid question, and lots of people were mentioning it. Simon, I think it was Simon was pointing it out. It was Rogers who got a trailer on the bike. It's one of those opportunities for smaller businesses, smaller local businesses, to have stuff to, you know, a village, for instance, a rural village. You can bring a van along, and they can park it in their garage while they go and deliver stuff around the village. It's a perfect opportunity for cargo bikes, maybe e-cargo bikes. I don't even know whether they exist, but I'm sure they will.
They do.
Go and do that last mile stuff instead of trundling around the estate, stopping and starting your diesel engine in your van, which could quite easily be done in the space of, let's say, an afternoon by a couple of enthusiastic lads on trying to beef up the muscles, or with e-bikes, or any other opportunities. I think there are a huge amount of opportunities from those last miles.
And just to pick that up, yes, absolutely. The cargo bike that Simon talked about, it could either be as it were a delivery company, the social enterprises that are running cargo bike deliveries, and as you're right, a lot of them are now electric assisted pedal cycles. They've been really busy during lockdown, helping out on the sort of delivery, providing that sort of social support. They've been incredibly busy, but families doing family shop. If we kind of take up cycling, as cycling becomes more normal, families are much more likely to have the sort of bicycle that you can carry the children on. And once you can carry the children, it can also carry the family shopping. It is the Dutch will just this idea that you can't do the family shopping on bicycles. Yes, the Dutch do.
Thank you. Okay, so in the interest of time, I think it's probably worth just asking one final question to the panelists, and that is, if you're a local authority looking at, you know, the emergency response, what's the number one priority that you should be thinking about when you're considering these new plans? If we go around each of the panelists for a final thought on that. Alexander, can we start with you?
I think understand your challenges unique to your area and understand where you can derive those benefits. So look at the data you've got, make sure you're really understanding how you can make plans tailored to your area, and then that's where you'll get solutions that work in the medium to longer term.
Councillor Mitchell.
Over there. Speed, potentially. There's both the speed of getting it sorted, the speed, the message, the communications that people need to be considerate of their fellow road users, because we are not going to be putting in some segregated schemes really quickly. But we need to have a message that really gets it across that not only can we not fit things instantly, despite the fact that people think houses are all going to get built tomorrow, but we need to have a more responsible discussion about the way people treat our highways and their fellow users of those highways.
Right. Roger?
I think the opportunity, the opportunity now is because everyone's completely accepting of the idea that schemes are going to go in temporary measures, just given the circumstances. This in a way creates that opportunity to get a network in to decent standards, more than paint, but not necessarily full-blown curb segregation, the sort of the traffic ones that I showed earlier. This is an opportunity to create networks, starting with the corridors that as Alex right said, use the data to identify the corridors with the greatest potential demand straight away, so you hopefully achieve successes with people using them to overcome that kind of backlash that is, the idea, no one cycles, but actually as soon as you put it in, people do cycle, and then you've got the evidence base to carry on, and as others have rightly said, learn from anything that doesn't work, adapt, and that adaptability, but using data, adaptability, but get a comprehensive networking quickly.
Now,
I would say thinking how to repurpose space, because we are not necessarily using space as we should be, or using all the potential we've got. We're generally speaking, we're wasting a lot of space in the way we use it. Transport is not always the best option. Delivering more transport is not necessarily the best thing to do. It could be just changing your habits, or working with other organizations to see how you can do things differently, rather than trying to overstretch your infrastructure. And also looking around and looking at the behavior of your community, what people want, the quick wins you can achieve by changing small things and working with your community. I think that those things are really sometimes easy, and we don't necessarily do them enough, and they don't cost a lot, but you could achieve big things with that.
Simon?
So for me, it would be keeping things simple. So this money has to spread quite far. And so signs, lines, bollards, giving local roads back to local communities, and not necessarily going after your major roads. Go after your local roads, give them back to local communities, stop that through traffic, but allow for freight and access and everything, and connecting them up with greenways and canals and everything like that to really make the most of a green and clean network.
Right, thank you very much. I guess it remains for me to thank all the panelists. I mean, I think there's so many questions we could have covered that we haven't had a chance to get through. So thank you to everyone who's asked all the questions. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to Alex, to Councillor Mitchell, to Roger, to Mal, and to Simon. I'm sure the conversation is going to continue. I'll be happy for you to talk to us on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, and thanks to Landor Links for organising the session. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Thank you.